If you take a seat, we're ready to get started. Okay, welcome back everyone. For our fourth talk of the day, we are graced by the presence of a visionary leader and a beacon of hope for his people, the Honorable Penpa Tsering. As a former speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in exile and the current Sikyong, or president of the Central Tibetan Administration, Penpa Tsering's leadership has been characterized by wisdom, diplomatic finesse, and a deep-rooted compassion for his people. Under his guidance, the Tibetan cause has not only gained global attention, but has also inspired movements worldwide. Now, his story is not just about political leadership. It's about cultural preservation, the fight for autonomy, and the relentless pursuit of justice. So as we gather here today to listen, learn, and be inspired, let us welcome a man who embodies the spirit of perseverance and the power of peaceful advocacy, His Excellency Penpa Tsering.
Oh, that's very bright light there. And I'm wearing quite a warm clothing, so I may be sweating a little bit. It's not as cold as outside. So thank you very much, Wes, Matthew, for the introduction. And I'm glad to the organizers for having me here. It's very rare that you get opportunities to speak about value-based freedom movements focused on nonviolence. And in today's world, you see a lot of violence all around. We expected this world, this 21st century, to be more nonviolent, where people are more educated, economically much better than before. But unfortunately, we are still surrounded by too much violence. And wherever there's violence, there is a lot more focus from governments, from media, and that's more like you're promoting violence. And then even non-violent strugglers like us have to rethink as to, oh, is this really the way to go forward? Because there's not enough attention on non-violence. So the opportunity to be able to speak here at WES is a welcome opportunity for us. Just to give you a context of where we are coming from, sometimes we live under the illusion that people know about us because His Holiness the Dalai Lama is so popular and he has been traveling around the world. And when His Holiness travels, he speaks more about universal responsibility, common interest, and for the oneness of humanity. Whereas His Holiness always says that the 8 billion people in this world, we are all same human beings. All of us are looking for happiness, whether you're in Europe or North America or Asia or Global South, wherever you are. So if we understand this concept of oneness of humanity, that we are all same, and the second concept of the interdependent nature of our existence. So anything that happens in one part of the world has its effect on the other part of the world, other parts of the world. So those of you who are not very familiar with Tibet, thank you already. Okay. This is just a map to show you where Tibet is located. I show you this map because sometimes I get asked questions about, is Bhutan or Tibet, which is bigger? So Tibet is about 10 times the size of UK, 18 times the size of Japan, and a quarter of China. And that's the size of Tibet. So this will also tell you about the geographical and geostrategic importance of Tibet. And we call ourselves as the land or the heavenly abode surrounded by snow mountain ranges. So when we say snow mountain ranges, we have Himalayas in the south, the Karakoram in the west, Kundun in the north, and a series of mountain ranges, snow-capped mountain ranges all around Tibet. So, and then the Westerners started calling Tibet as the roof of the world. So from this satellite image, you can see how high Tibet is. When I was in Japan, I asked them, which is your highest mountain? And they said, Mount Fuji. How high? 3,700 meters above sea level, roughly equivalent to about 12,000 feet above sea level. And I said, that's like base camp in Tibet. You start climbing from there. And then Today, Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet as the third pole. So apart from the North and South Pole, Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost. And that is also the reason why the Asians call Tibet as the fountain of Asian rivers or water tower of Asia. So it's a huge bio hotspot. Some people say that Third World War would happen because of water. If that is the case, then Tibet is a bio hotspot. You can see the yellow and Yangtze that goes into China. Yellow is the cradle of Chinese civilization, and it originates from Tibet. So these two are the lifelines of China. If not for these two rivers that originate from Tibet, China cannot support it, 1.4 billion people. And then you have the Mekong going into Laos, Burma, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand in 5 Southeast Asian countries. And you also have the Irrawaddy and the Salween going into Burma, today's Myanmar. And you also have the Brahmaputra that flows from Tibet into India and then into Bangladesh. And China is building a dam that is on this place called the Great Bend, where the Brahmaputra takes a U-turn to come into India. And it's supposed to be twice the size of Three Gorges, which is the biggest in the world. And this Himalayas came because of the tectonic shift between the Gondwanas and the Eurasian plate. So scientists say that Himalaya is still growing, and this whole belt is a seismic zone. If something happens to the size of that kind of a dam, you can imagine what's going to happen to people downstream in India and Bangladesh. They're all going to be washed away. And then you also have the Karnali that flows into Nepal and India. And just recently, there were satellite images of China building a huge dam on the Karnali, and that will also have impacts in India and Nepal. Then you have the Indus and the Jhelum that flows into India and into Pakistan. And Indus is the cradle of Indus Valley civilization. So the rivers that originate from Tibet are civilization to many humans around the world. And the countries that we are talking about are some of the most densely populated areas in the world. Some analysts say that out of 8 billion people, 1.8 billion people have something to do, something or the other, directly or indirectly, to do with rivers that originate from Tibet. So unfortunately, China does not share any hydrological data with any of its downstream riparian states. And we are talking about serious food and water security issues in the future in this region, depending on the water that China uses Tibet's water like a water tap. If there is excess, they let it flow, so you have floods downstream. If there is shortage, they close it off, so you have drought downstream. So this is just to give you an idea about the importance of the geostrategic importance of Tibet as well. Because Tibet is 2.5 million square kilometers, as I mentioned before, quarter of China, and Tibet has been the political buffer between the two most populous nations in the world. So till Tibet was occupied by China in 1950, there was never ever an India-China border. So even today, India calls Indo-Tibetan Border Police Indo-Tibetan Border Force, not Indo-China Border Police, or that underlines India's position on the border and the status of Tibet. So Tibet has historically played the role of a political buffer between the two most populous nations in the world. And today we are not asking for Tibetan independence, looking at the reality of the situation and the common interests of people, because His Holiness always appreciated the concept of European Union. If it had not been for the concept of European Union, Europeans would still be fighting with each other. If that can be applied to Europe, then why not to Tibet with China? And we cannot, you have the mythological Hanuman in India, the monkey god, who can fly and lift mountains. So we don't have a Hanuman to lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere near UK. So we'll have to, whenever we find a solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, return back to Tibet, and we'll have to live with Chinese. So if you have to live with Chinese, then why don't we live peacefully with each other? Just as we used to do for centuries, we lived together. Only because of Chinese communist hegemonistic ambitions. Today, Tibet has become one of the most inaccessible land. So you can, just recently there was the Universal Periodic Review on the human rights situation inside China, and there was a representation from the Tibetan Autonomous Region, and she was saying, you're welcome to come to Tibet and see for yourself the socialist paradise, but they don't allow people to come. So any of you can take the challenge to apply for a visa to go into Tibet. It's not enough to have a visa to go to China. You have to have another permit to go into Tibet. So that's how difficult it is. And even if you get to go, you cannot go on your free will. You will be shepherded around and show you what they want you to see, not what you want to see. So historically, Tibet was an independent state. Just to give you a little overview, and Tibet at one time was an imperial state in Central Asia alongside China and Mongolia. And between 7th to 9th century, Tibet's empire extended from Chinese capital Xiangyang those days to present-day Samarkand in Uzbekistan. That used to be the extent of Tibetan empire at one time. Then Tibet disintegrated for 400 years between 9th to 13th century. And then we developed relations with the Mongols when Mongols became a huge power from Genghis Khan up to Kublai Khan. Before Kublai Khan invaded China, we already had relations with Kublai Khan. We became their spiritual master, and they became our protector politically. So that's the relationship, a priest-patron relationship we built. And when Kublai Khan invaded China, then it became the Yuan dynasty of China from 1271 to 1368. And Yuans are Mongols, not Chinese. There are a lot of academic discourses as to who's the real Chinese. Is it only the Hans, or is it Tibetans and Mongols? If Mongols are also Chinese, maybe China can claim half of the world because Genghis Khan went that far. When Kublai Khan ruled China up to 1368, Tibet was ruled parallelly by the Sakyong dynasty in Tibet. And then the Yuan were overthrown by the Ming Chinese. They ruled China from 1368 to 1644. And we had 3 dynasties in Tibet, the Pamadrupa for about 100 years, Rinpoche for about 100 years, and Debatsangpo for 100 years, till the 5th Dalai Lama took over the spiritual and temporal leadership of Tibet in 1642, 2 years before the Manchus overthrew the Mings. So the Manchus Qing dynasty ruled China from 1368 to 1911. So that's, and the whole narrative of Tibet being part of China started during the communist time. So even today, when I reach out to governments, I tell them, if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, you're going against international law, because we have only one agreement with China. There's a 17-point agreement that was forced upon us, and the threat of war, where many people would be killed. So we were forced to sign this, and under international law, it should be null and void. Now, whether it's happening to Ukraine today or it happened to Tibet 70 years ago, it was the same international law after the formation of United Nations and definition of modern day nation state. Then we also tell governments that on one hand, they say Tibet is part of PRC, parroting China's line, not looking at the facts. And on the other hand, you have the government say we support negotiation between the representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. So I say these two don't go together, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand, and the whole international community parrots China's line that Tibet is part of PRC. Then you are removing the very ground for negotiation. So where's the reason for China to come and talk to us when the whole international community keeps saying that Tibet is part of PRC, not based on facts? And then the third thing we tell the international community is that, why do you think China is asking other governments to say only Tibet is part of China? Why not they ask other governments to say Manchuria is part of China, or East Turkestan is part of China, or Mongolia is part of China? Why only Tibet? That's because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule over Tibet. And they're trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. So this being the case, this is part of my advocacy. Even though we follow the middle way, I follow His Holiness the Dalai Lama to seek a peaceful resolution to Sino-Tibet conflict. And this is what I try to explain to the international community as to where we stand and how we plan to move forward and try to seek a non-violent solution that could be lasting. and mutually beneficial, we say, because we can gain economically from the Chinese, and Chinese can gain spiritually from the Tibetans, because you're talking about at least 250 to 300 million Chinese Buddhists in China. So I'll stop here. Maybe we can talk, since this is an economic summit, maybe we can talk a little more about where China is in terms of, there is a lot of deceleration in growth, a lot of unemployment among youth. The official data is 21.3%, which comes to about 12, 13 million young Chinese between the age of 16, 17 to 24 who are unemployed. Unofficial number is 46.7%, so it could be any number up to 30 million Chinese youth who are unemployed today. And then you have the property huge domestic consumption. There's no confidence in spending within China, which China expected to increase once they reverse their zero COVID policy. And local governments also going bankrupt. So there are serious economic problems that China is going through. And I keep saying the trade between, let's say, European Union and China. European Union buys only they buy 600 billion worth of Chinese goods, and they sell only 200 billion. So you have a trade deficit of 400 billion every year. And China has all these foreign exchange reserves. Till about 7 months ago, they used to say $3.6 trillion worth of foreign exchange reserve. And they splurge it on artificial intelligence, space technology, quantum computing, military, Belt and Road Initiative, creating all these dead economies from Asia. I can just tell you the South China Sea issue. I'm sure you're all very familiar about China's hegemonistic ambitions through the Malacca Straits. Cambodia is almost 40% in debt with China, and they have taken over the Sihanoukville port, part of Sihanoukville port. Burma has already conceded the Coco Islands so that China can have overview of the Bay of Bengal. And Sri Lanka went bankrupt last year, and they could not pay back the debts that Chinese invested in airport and the seaport, so they took over the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Pakistan is not able to pay back that debt, so the Chinese government has taken over the Gwadar port, which gives them access to the whole Arabian Sea. And then they are connecting that through the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is 60 billion project, part of the BRI project from China. And then, China is the biggest bully in the world, so they try to play peacemaker between the smaller bullies like Pakistan and Iran. Iran fired a missile in Pakistan just about 15, 20 days ago. And Pakistan also fired something, and China played the peace broker, and 1 week they were back into normal relationship, maybe not so normal, but that is how China is doing. And China had this diplomatic coup between getting Saudis and Iranians together. And then the whole Red Sea, China's properties in Djibouti, Tanzania, Zambia, you name it, in Global South, particularly in Africa, how much they're investing, but it does not come for free. Chinese never give anything for free. All their moves are very, very strategic. So the places that I mentioned, from Cambodia to Burma to Sri Lanka, and the ongoing tussle between India and China on Maldives, and the Gwadar port, Middle East, Iran, Africa, Djibouti, they have taken over the port. They also have base there. And then they reach out to Greece. Italy also became part of Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Prime Minister Meloni decided it's best to get out of that. So they got out of it. But their ports in Portugal, last year when I was in Germany, they had just taken over part of Hamburg port in Germany. So this is the level of thing, and there are some books here I can show you as to why I say Tibet's independent status. It's not just us speaking. I'm not carrying any books, historical books written by Tibetans, because that would be considered biased. So I have a book by Michael van Wall from Prague, who is law. Tibet has never been considered part of China. And there is another book in Chinese by a Chinese professor who was very intrigued when he was young as to why Chinese government is asking every government to say Tibet is part of China, if Tibet was already a part of China. So he was a professor in City University of Hong Kong, and today he's based in San Diego. He was with us in Estonia for a hearing. He was in London also, invited by Office of Tibet to speak about his research work. And he says that I'm being chauvinistic and I referred only to Chinese historical records. And he referred to Yuan dynasty, Ming dynasty, and Qing dynasty. And he categorically proves that imperial China never considered part of Tibet being part of China. So these two books are very much available. The English translation will come out in the next 3 months. And then I have another book called Hidden Hand by Dr. America Olbach and also Clive Hamilton from Australia. America used to work for Marshall Fund. And that describes how China structures its organization in the China to influence globally, how they influence through the Chinese scholars and students associations. If the federal governments don't listen, they go to state governments. If a ruling party doesn't listen, they go to opposition parties. They use all kinds of friendship associations and means to influence the Western world. The question is, the West wants to change China. They hope that if China becomes part of the international community, China will change for the better. But the question really is, how much is West changing China, or how much is China changing the world? Thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions you have.
Thank you to the Honourable Penpa Tsering for leading another thought-provoking session. It's Q&A time now, so a gentle reminder to wait for our team who have microphones. Please raise your hand and we can come to you. Brilliant. We've got a question just here.
Thank you, Penpa Tsering, and for your presentation. I really welcome and support freedom of speech, but I just want to make one thing clear. Tibet is part of China. It's always been part of China throughout history for hundreds of years, long before the Chinese Communist Party was established. So I would say that your so-called Central Tibetan Administration is an illegal organization, not recognized by the UN, the international community, or the UK government. So this is a fact, not a question. So my question to you is, do you think Scotland is part of Britain, and should Scotland be independent? Thank you.
Now, of course, you're entitled to your view, but as a student studying in the free world, you have access to a lot more information that then you have access to real information within China. I don't blame you. You are a Chinese. It reflects from your view, and we are not against the Chinese people. Chinese people are also suffering as much as we are. And I hope you learn to appreciate the freedom that you have here, studying in Warwick and in UK. But look into these documents. I'm not saying it. I'm not bringing any history books written by Tibetans. One book is written by, as I mentioned, Michael van Wall. He's an expert on international law. Read this, and then you tell me which part of it is wrong. This is in Chinese, written by a Chinese professor, Lao Antun. And he is a Chinese, and he quotes from imperial historical records of China, which were available on the Chinese website by the government of China. Now they have taken parts of it because Professor Lau was smart enough to download all the documents that were available on Chinese document in the Chinese government website. And he proves categorically that Tibet was never considered part of China by imperial China. Of course, you mentioned Tibet was part of China before communists came into. Can you give me one example of a country who's not influenced by any of these neighboring countries? When I was talking to some friends in Lithuania, they're saying, oh, you have more right to independence than us because we were occupied many times by other countries. Tibet was never occupied by India or any other countries, except still the communists invaded China. So there was never ever a common boundary between India and China. There was never ever, historically, there was never ever a war between India and China. Only after Chinese communists invaded Tibet, there was the first war between India and China in 1962. So these are facts. Whatever you mention, whatever I mention, you look at the facts and then decide for yourself what is the truth. But even then, now we are not asking for independence because we are being realistic, because the preservation of Tibetan identity is more important to us. Because we have a language that came from India, a script that came from India, nothing to do with Chinese language. Tibetan Buddhism also came from India. So we are extension of an Indian culture. And we are very proud to be a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom that has the potential to spread more peace and nonviolence and compassion in this world. So if you decide to disagree, I cannot force you to agree with me. You're entitled to your opinion, but I'm just mentioning facts. I'm not going into stories about what you have been told. So being a university students, you should also learn how to rely on information that's based on facts. And Chinese government cannot change Tibet's history because it's the past. So let third parties decide what is Tibet's history. When His Holiness was put the condition that Dalai Lama should say Tibet is part of China, His Holiness says, I'm a Buddhist monk, I cannot lie. So what he says is, let's leave history to historians. What concerns us more is the livelihood of Tibetans and the Chinese, how we can live together in peace with each other. Yeah, so this is, maybe you should read to me, maybe you need to read more. And then you are saying, of course, when China is forcing every country to say Tibet is part of PRC, can you ask other nations, are they willingly saying it? No, even at the United Nations, we consider United Nations as one of the most undemocratic institutions in this world. And United Nations is like a human body without arms and legs because it's not able to implement its own resolutions. We reached out to United Nations in 59, 61, and 65. And the United Nations General Assembly decided that Tibetans should have the right to self-determination. There's nothing beyond that. And even at the recent UN the Human Rights Council, where there was a universal periodic review of China's human rights record. There also we see the Chinese coercive methods in forcing other countries to say what they want these countries to say because they invest money there. That's why I say nothing comes for free from China. So you give investment, then you ask these countries to vote for what you want them to vote for, including the Global South. So you have majority of the Latin American countries, from Africa, from SCO nations, Middle East, Southeast Asia supporting Tibet. And there was only 21, 24 countries that supported Tibet, and East Turkestan is. So I don't want to argue with you on what is the reality. You look at these books, you look at studies, and then you decide for yourself. You just cannot represent the Chinese government on what they have said. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the question. We do ask that questions are posed in a way. Just as a reminder, we do ask that questions are posed in a way that's respectful to our speaker. It's obviously, it's our privilege to have him here today. So we ask that you honor that as well. We'll take a question from our virtual audience now. It seems the CCP are pursuing parallel policies to quell unrest. On the one hand, economic development that often has repressive consequences, and on the other, direct oppression, intense surveillance, etc. Is there a similar situation developing in Tibet?
Internationally, I think there are a lot of mixed messages happening from China, because I think China's government itself is right now very confused about what they want. On the one hand, they don't want to leave their hegemonistic ambitions in the region, which is fueling defense expenditures of all the countries around China. So who's responsible for all this? When I was speaking in Japan, one young boy asked me, how can I defend my country? Then my question was, how did this question get in the mind of this young boy? Where is the threat coming from? So Japan has to spend more because of China's actions. Taiwan definitely has to spend more. They don't have any other option. Australia, for the first time, is going to spend $356 billion to buy 7 nuclear submarines in the next 15, 20 years. New Zealand, for the first time, I was there in June last year, and for the first time, security is becoming an issue. It has never been an issue. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins went with a strong trade delegation to China, because there are very few countries that have surplus of trade with China. Only New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Thailand, Taiwan. Some of these people, all the rest of the countries around the world have trade deficit with China. And now China comes up with maps that claims the whole of South China as part of China. So now you have problems with Philippines, you have problems with Malaysia, Brunei, India, and all these countries. And India is spending a lot of money on infrastructure right now on the Himalayan border because of China's belligerence there. If I give you one example, last year when after Qinggang was kicked out, the former foreign minister, we still don't know whether he's really alive or not. Some say he's already dead, but he's missing. Can you think about any other country where there was a former minister and we still don't know where he is or whether he's alive or not? And then you have Li Shangfu, former defense minister, was missing. Now you have so many purges in the name of anti-corruption. So when Wang Yi was brought back as foreign minister, and he met with President Macron in France, he met with Chancellor Scholz in Germany, then he meets with President Orban in Hungary, and then he meets with President Putin when the whole Ukraine war was going on. So the main concern for the Europeans was how to de-escalate and bring an end to the Ukraine war. And then you have Chinese government shaking hand from Western Europe up to Russia. And the deepening relationship between China and Russia is now fueling more speculations. And also the Israel-Hamas thing, also you have the Hezbollah and the Houthis. So there are some invisible hands of China in these countries. So China wants European market. China wants better relations with the United States because the United States is the largest trading partner. They have 560 billion trade between the two countries. And now China is looking at global South. How much purchasing power does the global South have? And if China exports all the overproduction they have, because right now, everywhere there's inflation, but there's deflation in China. Chinese economists cannot speak about words like depression, so they keep their mouth shut. You have, data security law, you have anti-espionage law, you have state secrets law. Everything is aimed at more control. And this is not creating better atmosphere for investors. So you have FDI going down. China's PMI went down below 50 some months ago. Now it's back to 50.3 or 50.6. So China is sending a lot of mixed messages. That is why I sometimes think, oh, the leaders don't know what to do right now. On the one hand, they need the market, but on the other hand, they don't want to leave their hegemonistic ambitions. And today, Xi Jinping is talking about global security initiative, global economic initiative, global civilizational initiative to put in the minds of Westerners or the free world what they mean by human rights in their context. And they want to force their system of governance on the rest of the world. Now, would you like an authoritarian government in UK, just like China has? And this is for the free world to decide. So Chinese ambitions are very large, and they sent a lot of mixed messages around the world. And right now, I think you need to really study China and its motivations, understand China. Otherwise, it's going to be very detrimental for the nation or the people in that country. When I was in Mexico, I told them, I'm not here only for Tibet. If you don't understand China, the Mexicans hate the Americans because of border issues, immigration, and all that. And I tell them, if United States is the frying pan, you're jumping into the fire cauldron. And the former Mexican foreign minister's nickname was China Boy. And you see China's influence all over, how they try to get politicians. Once they retire, they're on the boards of big companies making money. Even in the UK, if you read this book from America, although this also details people who have benefited through China's influence. So I'm not speaking it. This is a German lady and an Australian gentleman who wrote this book. I didn't write this book. And you hear you can read Merrick's report from Europe. You can read another report on how China, Merrick's report is all about China hacking, not asking for ransom, but they are all there in the biggest institutions and business, the infrastructure in Europe. They are there and they can cripple Europe anytime through technology. Now it's not a man-to-man fight, it's through technology. And you are talking about the undersea internet cables located in very strategic locations of Europe. And what are all these meant for? So these are things you need to understand, listen, see, learn, and understand how China is operating around the world. Then you know how to strategically handle China. That's why in Europe also now we are telling them you have to develop a very good anti-economic coercion law or system, because otherwise China picks you up like how the colonials used to play against the colonies of divide and rule and carrot and stick. They do the same thing to Europe. If Germany doesn't listen, they go to France. If France doesn't listen, they go to Italy. And they do that. Now, if there is no uniform pushback from Europe, China is always going to pick and gain. So that is why you have to have some strategic, options when you deal with China, and just like US is doing with high-tech microchips, alongside Netherlands and Japan and South Korea. They've decided not to supply China with all these machineries to produce these high-end microchips. So these are very strategic, and now China is crying for. You cannot have a lot of things in China, but they want access of everything in the free world. They take advantage of the transparency of democracy, and they hide all their data. Now you are not, how can you do business when you cannot come out with analysis of where the economy is going? But these are things that China is doing which are not good for the world. And as long as, the earlier the Chinese government realizes that, I think it's better for everybody.
Great, thank you. We'll take a question from the gentleman in the front.
Should religious or spiritual morality be reinterpreted to meet contemporary political demands?
Spirituality is individual choice. And when His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, devolved his administrative and political responsibilities in 2011, people spoke about, oh, now Tibetan democracy, there's true democracy, there's separation between church and state. But it's not like the church of medieval age in Europe. It's totally completely different. But when His Holiness is asked this question, His Holiness would always say, if a politician is guided by the values of spiritualism, that person can serve their people better or their government better. So a person is always judged by the values that you follow. And many of the values are enshrined in spirituality. And if you can combine these two, not make spirituality a problem. The spirituality is meant to bring more peace to yourself and to the whole community at large. So if it is misused, then you have conflicts because of spiritualism. So that should not be the case. Spiritualism should serve for the betterment of humanity to bring more peace. And if you're guided by spirituality, there'll be less corruption, because you always have to think about me being a spiritual person. I have to always analyze myself every night before I go to sleep, whether I did something wrong today or not. So if you can be guided that way, you can always be a better human being.
Brilliant. We'll take a question from the person in the front. So,
And maybe I just want to add that you don't need to be really spiritual to make this world a better world. Even in ethics, if you bring out the best in yourself, you can contribute to make this world a better world. But if you're spiritual and if you have inclination for that, it's good. And you have so many religions meant for people with different mental dispositions. For some, Islam is good, for some, Christianity is good, for some, Buddhism is good, Sikhism, Hinduism, whatever. So you have 8 billion people in this world with different mental dispositions and inclinations, and every religion suits a particular community or individual. And the idea is to respect all other religions, practice your own religion, but respect all other religions. Then that can definitely make a better world to live in. Sorry. Just wanted to add that.
So I'm glad someone brought up the topic. So the independent country of Scotland, which unlike Tibet is willingly part of a larger union, the United Kingdom, they recently had an independence referendum discussing the possibility of being their own independent country and leaving the union. What would you think, being, imagine, the head of the administration of Tibet, be the best way to proceed with larger autonomy for Tibet? And how would you go ahead with this endeavor to preserve and spread Tibetan values and Tibetan culture?
Now, I think we did study a lot of autonomous arrangements around the world, including Scotland, including South Tyrol. You have the Åland Island in Finland. You have Greenland, part of Denmark, Quebec, Nunavut, Micronesia. So many autonomous arrangements around the world, and not all are same. There's no photocopy of one autonomous arrangement with another, because it depends on the level of negotiation or your strength at that time between the federal government or the central government and the state. So it is definitely up to the individual community that fights for whatever they are fighting for. But as long as we are concerned, even in the case of Tibet, if Tibetans people inside Tibet are happy, then why should we not be happy? So the question is whether the people in Tibet are happy, whether people in East Turkestan are happy, whether people in Mongolia are happy, whether people in Hong Kong are happy. If they are all happy, why they have to run out of that place? And if it is as the Chinese government claims that Tibet is a socialist paradise, then why don't you allow other people to see the paradise for themselves instead of describing it, it's a socialist paradise? Make it accessible to outsiders without guide, without all that. So His Holiness, many people tell us, oh no, if you have to negotiation, you have to ask for that much, then you'll get only so much. But we can't do that. We can't lie. We can't be, saying things that we don't really mean. So we have been very forthright in our approach. When Jimmy Carter our people approached Jimmy Carter for some, because Jimmy has good relations with His Holiness, and Jimmy Carter said, if you're asking for this, maybe you should start from somewhere else. But His Holiness said, I can't do that. So that's how we are approaching this. We are being very frank and forthright. We don't mean bad for Chinese people. Chinese people are also human beings. We are also human beings. It's only the leadership. That's why I keep saying they don't have common sense. So if you have good hospitals here, which that used to joke that we can bring Chinese leaders one by one here and do brain surgery, put common sense and send them back so that they can make some good decisions.
Thank you. We'll take another question from our virtual audience now. So in your opinion, does China's treatment towards Tibet differ from that towards Hong Kong or Taiwan? Also, can Tibet apply the same strategies that activists in Taiwan and Hong Kong are using?
Tibetan activists?
That activists in Taiwan and Hong Kong are using, can Tibet apply the same strategies?
Hong Kongers like to be called as Hong Kongers, not Chinese, even though they speak Chinese language. Taiwanese also like to be called Taiwanese, not Chinese, even though they speak Chinese language. But Tibet is completely different. We have our language, Tibetan language. In fact, Tibetan language is one among the 15 most oldest languages in this world. We have some 76 families of languages in Tibet, in Tibetan. There are 305 spoken languages in Tibet, Tibetan language. So that's how rich Tibetan language is. Just recently, we have come out with a Tibetan dictionary of 223 volumes of hard copies. So that's how rich Tibetan language is. You know, so in that sense, oh no, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, for sure. So can Tibet apply the same strategies
Yeah,
that activists are using?
So the Tibetan situation, the background, the method, and ask quite different, because our situation, Hong Kong situation, is completely different. But I tell our Hong Kong friends, I meet them very often in different countries, that you are all very young, educated, very good in advocacy, but you need to organize yourselves. You cannot work individually every time. Because when you face an opponent like China, I don't like to call Chinese enemy also. They're just opponents. And I always often say Chinese friends. So Hong Kongers also need to organize themselves if they are there for the long haul. We also felt that we will not have to live in exile for so long. Those days when His Holiness first came to India, we thought that we'll get to go back in a few years, just like the 13th Dalai Lama had to flee Tibet and came to India in 1910, and he returned back in 1912, 2 years after that. And we thought same thing could happen during 14th Dalai Lama's time, but it is not so. So we are prepared for the long haul. As every community has this saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We are hoping for the best, that some real sense will go into Chinese leaders' mind and Sino-Tibet conflict would be resolved peacefully. But till such a time, we have to keep on moving. So Tibet situation is different, Taiwan situation is different, and Hong Kong situation is different. But then last June, we organized meetings of Mongolians, Uyghurs, Taiwanese, Tibetans, and Manchuria also came for the first time. And just recently, when the Taiwan president election was going on, we organized another meeting of all these groups together. Unfortunately, Uyghurs have about 7 governments in exile. We are the only government in exile with a fully democratic functioning, and we are only one under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So sometimes our Uyghur friends used to say, Tibetans have had nobody, because we are a very small population in exile. And the Uyghurs, they have body but no head. So they look up to Tibetans to lead. And when you come to pro-democracy, Chinese leaders also is the same thing. You have so many different groups within the Chinese. And if one Chinese group calls a meeting of all these others, they don't come. So Tibetans are the uniting factor. When we invite, then all groups come together. So that's how we try to bring some, we try to find some common ground, despite our differences in background and methods. Hopefully, things will get better.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll take one more question from the person in the front.
Hi, yeah. So my name is Diyar Turkmani, and I'm a student at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon. So you mentioned a lot of experiences that I kind of resonated with, given the fact that we share a border with the state of Israel, and there's a current ongoing war on Gaza. And I think my main question for you is, how do you think countries that are seeking large and independent autonomy should deal with the reality of the fact that the binary reality between the East and the West does not represent an ideal democratic solution for us? So for example, when the Arab and Islamic world sees how China deals with Uyghur Muslims, or how Russia bombs Syria, and as well as how they, generally speaking, have shown a growing distaste with how, for example, the United States funds Israel to a large extent to bomb people in Palestine. Do you think there's a way to take matters into our own hands instead of having to rely on geopolitical powers?
I didn't get all the words, exact words, but I'm not an expert on West Asia politics. I get to to study what is happening now in Israel, Gaza, Hezbollah, Houthi, all this escalation of violence in that area. As Tibetan, we have always advocated for peace. And peace is the only means to do that, whether you're fighting for a just cause. If you're fighting for a just cause, peace is the only means. Peaceful means are the only way to get things done that will be long lasting. And right now, whoever is to be blamed, you can everybody can blame each other. You look at the genesis of all these problems, there will be some problem. If you look at the immediate cause of the present conflict, there are problems. Somebody will blame each other. But then the question is this going to get better? Or are you creating more space for more violence in the future? Because all these kids, all the young people are witness to all this destruction. We are for building and things are being destroyed in that region. So all I can say is work for peace, and through peaceful means. You will not get nowhere using force and violence, whether it's Israel or Hamas or Lebanon or Syria or whoever it is, Iran, whoever it is, we have to find peaceful means to resolve conflicts, not violence means to resolve. Because violence begets more violence. And just as Gandhi said, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. If you want a completely blind world, then you can go for war. Or otherwise look for peace. Even with Ukrainians, of course, there is no space for peaceful resistance. But I said, if there is a peaceful resistance, I'll be the first to join Ukraine. So I only advocate for peace.
And with that answer, I think we'll bring the Q&A segment to a close. It's been a real eye-opener to learn more about the Tibetan freedom movement and the challenges that you faced along the way. So we really do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Please give His Excellency a huge round of applause.
Thank you. So one for Matthew. I don't have enough for everybody. So if you want a scarf, please come to Dharamsala. We'll be happy to offer you one. But this time, thank you, Matthew, for moderating the session and also West's leadership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Are we done?
Right. The next session will be our first debate of this year's summit, taking place at 4:05. So we'll see you back in here around 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.